Hokey pokey weirdos, I'm Rev, and welcome to my world of cosplay shenaniganery. Are y'all ready to see what I felt like were absolute dumpster fires when I first finished them? Looking back on them now, I don't feel like they're as terrible as I initially thought. I mean, I need to give myself a little slack considering I made these pieces in 2021 when I had a lot less knowledge and experience. This video is for the sword, and I will link the vid for the armor up here. So let's get into some quick disclaimers. These were my very first nearly fully EVA foam projects, as commissions. I greatly reduced the price of the build due to my lack of knowledge in foam smithing at the time. And it was one of my first 3 commissions, so I was in a state of still working out how I wanted to handle commissions and what I was capable of making for other people. No, I am not available for any EVA foam project commissions of this magnitude as of posting this video for now, because thanks to these 2 projects, I learned a great deal and want time to practice with what I've learned so that I can create much higher quality projects for my customers. Therefore, I am posting my builds of the sword and armor not as tutorials, but in feeling that plenty of people can learn from my mistakes. And also to show that we all have to begin somewhere, so feel free to try something new, because even if it doesn't go perfectly, you might surprise yourself. Looking back on this build, which started in December of 2021 and ended in October of 22, past me actually really impressed current me, because I managed to make something like this with what very little knowledge and materials I had at the time. How the heck did I manage this? Let's take a look at how I made this sword for Rena from Hack. To begin, I started with sketching out a paper pattern. Go! Alright, again. Go! That's more like it. And to bring down the dauntingness a little bit, I plan to break the sword up into 5 sections. These 5 segments would also allow for the sword to break apart for easier transportation. With my measured out guidelines drawn and my digital version segmented, I could begin drawing out the shape of the sword. Everything was first drawn in pencil. Once I was sure I had perfectly straight lines and had correctly mathed all of my math, then I could retrace over everything in marker. To simplify the sketching process for myself, I only drew one side of the sword, then folded the paper in half and cut out both halves together to keep everything symmetrical. Next, I traced the shape of the PVC pipe to the center of the paper sword. I measured out how long each segment of PVC pipe would have to be, including the little connectors, because this was something I almost missed when I was doing the math here. The little connectors added some distance as well as bulk, so I had to be careful with my measurements in these segments. The PVC pipe was cut, and I actually had to buy a specialty PVC pipe connector to connect the sword blade to the hilt, because my local Home Depot had run out of the one specific size and thickness of PVC pipe that I wanted, so I had the hilt be a little thicker. This actually ended up working very well because it allowed for a more sturdy connector to be used to connect the hilt and blade, as well as giving the hilt a girthier grip. And I am still quite proud of this paper sketch, so once I get my printer up and working again, I do want to get the digital pattern of this sword up on my Etsy shop, as well as Patreon for y'all. The link tree is linked below. Continuing with the PVC pipe, it was heat formed and curved into the correct shape at the handguard, as well as flattening the tip of the blade. This process was mostly done by my brother Sable because he weighs a lot more than me and could more easily squash the PVC pipe. Be sure to wear a respirator during the heating of PVC pipe because those fumes can get real nasty. Next was to cut out the foam. While I would have preferred to leave the sword mostly hollow, my client requested it to be an extra beefy boy. Firstly, I cut out 3 layers of high-density foam all in the shape of the sword to act as the beefy interior sections. Then I marked those pieces with all the segment-related labels, those being pieces 1 through 5, and if they belong to the right or left side of the sword. The PVC pipe shape down the center of the sword was cut away from each form. Then each piece for the 5 segments were separated from the complete shape. Once cut, all these pieces were aligned and I trimmed any excess so that every single piece could match. Each uniquely shaped piece was traced onto much thicker high-density foam for those pieces to later act as the outside facings. Especially because this foam was gray and it would be much easier to translate over into the silver of the sword as compared to painting the white foam gray and then silver. If I was to make a project like this now, I would definitely insist upon a mostly hollow sword because the weight was becoming a lot for the PVC pipe connectors to handle. The 3 white sections would likely end up being more like borders at a 1/2 inch or maybe even a 1/4 of an inch thick, cutting out the middle and leaving just enough to attach to the PVC pipe. Then the large gray pieces would be used to cover up those holes. This way the sword would be nearly hollow and much lighter, while still having some interior structure. These borders would allow for the sword to stay stable while being detached in the 5 sections, and each individual piece still being able to hold its shape. On to contact cement! Be sure to wear a respirator and be in a well-ventilated area for this one too. First, I tried to connect each individual piece to the PVC pipe, and then to each other. Then I tried gluing all the matching pieces together first before attaching them to the PVC. The second method proved more efficient, so the rest of the sections were cemented or glued first before meeting the PVC. To fill in the gaps where the foam and PVC didn't properly connect, I experimented with using caulk, which is known to be used to fill in cracks for construction or handyman-y? Which is known to be used to fill in cracks for construction or handyman-styled housework. Sadly, while it seemed like a really good idea and I still feel like it should work, not all the caulk properly got a grip on the foam or the PVC, which could be chalked up to the difference in materials not being extremely cohesive or some sort of error on my part. My best guess is that I should have roughed up the PVC with some sandpaper so that the caulk could have had a more textured surface to grip, but why it didn't stick to the EVA foam is beyond me. This led to my next step being hot gluing all of these segments together to reinforce that grip that the caulk could not manage. And in all of these gluing stages, I was being very careful to avoid all of the connector segments so that I would not completely fuse the sword together and it could still come apart in the 5 sections. My next step was heat sealing all of my foam. However, this should have happened much sooner. I should have heat sealed each individual piece right after I cut them out. Doing this would have made each step a lot easier and would have kept the foam from simply absorbing so many of all the glues that I attempted to use during this process. Also, don't put your heat gun too close to the foam or keep it over the foam for too long, because in this shot you can obviously see that I burnt some of my white foam. Over time, I did realize which densities and thicknesses of foam could handle a certain proximity from, as well as a certain amount of time with, the heat gun. And it really depends on the temperature of your heat gun and the quality and thickness of your foam, so it takes some experimenting. Once I figured out a method and timing that worked best for me, you can obviously see in the videos when the pieces were fully heat sealed because their texture and coloring changed slightly. After having learned that I needed to heat seal the pieces first, I dremeled and heat sealed the gray pieces, then glued them down to the rest of the project. You can see that I was making an attempt to use E6000 instead of contact cement to see which glue I preferred in this build process. Ran low on the E6000. Gonna use that one. But that was also because my contact cement had dried out. Oops. Looking back on this project now, I can see that I likely needed to Dremel this project a little bit more in certain sections. But considering I didn't have a whole lot of practice with my Dremel to start with, I didn't do too terribly. This project, however, definitely gave me a lot of practice with the Dremel, and now I know better. Time to start covering all the layered sections that were still exposed. I cut and heat sealed the borders, then glued them down along the side lengths of each of the 5 segments. I'd gone back to contact cement by this point because I'd finally been able to purchase some more after realizing that it was the best adhesive for this project. Then I moved to painting. This should have not been the next step because I later found that I needed to Dremel some of those border edges into beveled edges. So don't make dumb moves like me. Dremel your pieces first, then paint them. That way you don't have to repaint them. The paint I used was a combination of white acrylic and Cosflex. Cosflex acts as my non-toxic substitute for Plastidip, and yeah, I probably should have used gray paint because the white acrylic completely destroyed my purpose of using gray foam to better match the silver paint. Derp. A method for cleaning up EVA foam dust that I found helpful because not as much dust jumped into the air while I was cleaning was wetting down the particles first. And now I know that vacuuming away the mess while working on the project is even more advantageous, so check out Kamui Cosplay's videos on that because I am definitely not the expert here. Moving on to the last two pieces of the sword, I had the hilt and the section with the 3 curves on each side. The logo and textures for the PVC pieces on the hilt were sanded away with my Dremel. I cut out and glued down the borders for each of these 2 pieces. Then I wrapped the length of the hilt in a rectangular piece of foam to bulk up the grip a little more, as well as wrapped a really thick rectangle of EVA foam at the very base of the hilt to recreate this shape. Finally, everything was sealed with the mixture of Cosflex and acrylic paint, so I moved on to spray paint for the next round of sealant. Spray painting. Just before the werewolves come to take me away. Everybody got a couple clear coats of spray paint to seal everything I'd already done. Then I pulled out the silver spray paint and went to town with that color. The whole sword needed about 1 can per layer, including both sides. And I went through 3 cans. For the squiggly blue detailing on the blade, I drew those myself by hand. In blue Sharpie. I made a paper pattern, traced it onto the blade, then scribbled in all of the blue. Would this have been easier to do with paint? Yes. Did I have any blue metallic paint at the time? No. So the Sharpie allowed for the metallic shimmery silverness to show through, as well as the Sharpie being shimmery itself. So was there an easier way to get these details on here? Yes. Did I do it that way? No! And while the sword did not get another clear coat of spray paint after getting the Sharpie drawn on it, it really should have. After painting the handguard and the bottom of the hilt with a base of yellow, then a top coat of gold, the remaining section of the exposed black foam on the grip was wrapped in faux black leather. Eventually, I finished with what came out to be a bit of a janky sword. However, in these photos as well as videos for the final product, the sword does look a little more off than it actually would once it's properly pieced together. Each of the 5 pieces were not completely locked into each other for the reveal because I purposely made these pieces difficult to pull apart. I was going to be shipping the sword the next day and did not want to struggle with breaking these pieces apart to get them into their box. So there are those larger gaps between the pieces in these images, but they are much smaller once all the pieces are properly clicked together. Also, thank you to my brother Sable for being a sword model. He's such a good sport. And that was how I made my first 5-foot tall anime sword. The armor video will either be coming soon or is already linked for you. If you want to follow along with any builds that I am doing now, that I so very much hope are not nearly as error-ridden as this one, you can follow me on Ko-fi and Patreon. My plan for my next big EVA foam project is a personal project of Ceres from Galaxy Quest. And I will link the videos of my prototyping for this project up here because this is a massive monster of a costume and it's going to take a lot of work and a long time, so I'm doing it in little segments. Especially working on it when the weather is warmer so it's more comfortable to either be in my garage or outside. To make a request for build videos on any costumes that I have already made, you can check out this video here to see what selection there is. I love all of my amazing weirdos and would greatly appreciate it if you could help prove to YouTube that there are those of us who still prefer to watch long-form content. So remember those subs, comms, thumbs, and a ding. And welcome to the madness.